If you didn't see Nuts and Bolts Drawing Part 1, make sure to watch that before continuing with this video. This is Nuts and Bolts Drawing Part 2, where we're going to apply value to our line drawing to try to further create the illusion of form. A value scale is a range of lightness and darkness. It could be a color, but in this case it's just gray because we're using a pencil. I'm going to try to fill in these blocks on my value scale so that the visual space between each block is equal from white to black. I'll make a few small adjustments and then be ready to assign one of these values to each flat plane of our nuts and bolts. Before we begin applying value, however, I'll go ahead and clean up our line drawing and erase all of the stray marks that we used to construct our line drawing. Those are no longer necessary and might get in the way of the description of each individual plane, especially the marks that are on the inside of the bolt itself. Typically, I like to identify what's white and what's black first in my subject matter, or if there's white and black. And in this bolt, in fact, the lower sides of the bolt head and the nut also have some black in them. So I'll go ahead and lay that black in. And any other spots that I see that I think are also best described with black. Now that the black is in place, I'll move to the next step on our value scale. We'll call it darkest gray, and identify any of the sides of my subject that I think are best represented with the darkest gray. I'll continue to work my way down the value scale through the midtones all the way to the lightest gray. Some of these surfaces may have more than one value on them. So far, I've avoided the threads of the bolt. I consider those to be a detail on the cylinder, and the structure of the cylinder is much more important than the threads themselves. But I'll go ahead and start working on the threads now, again working my way from the darkest side of the value scale towards the lightest side. And so I see some black through the threading. Now the threading is not made of clean shapes like the sides of the nut and the sides of the bolt head. The threading is made up of rough or jagged shapes. You can represent those threads with sharp lines, but for this drawing I'm going to focus on shape. So I've laid in the dark shapes. I'll refine the shape of the side of the cylinder as I go so that it appears to be threading instead of a smooth side. Alright, I'm almost done with the threads now. You can see that I have used some black lines to represent the edge of the threads on the top side of the bolt. And I also need some small, shiny white highlights. So I'll use my eraser to pull or dig those out of the darker areas. Highlights are details, and so you want to save those until near the end of a drawing. Alright, well, I have a nut and bolt that's floating on a white piece of paper. It doesn't have any place to live. So to give it some surface to rest on, I'll go ahead and create a shadow, what is a cast shadow. And some of the characteristics of cast shadows that differ from shadows that are actually on objects is that a cast shadow is darker where it is closer to the object and lighter the farther it gets away from that object that casts it. Also, cast shadows are soft around the edges, and again, they're softer the farther they are from the object, just like they're lighter. So softer and lighter, farther from the object, darker and sharper, closer to the object. Now that my shadow is complete or in place, I'm going to go back to the nut and bolt itself and compare those values against the shadow and different areas of the shadow and see if they seem like they're the right distance apart, these values. Some of them will probably need adjusting, maybe a little lighter, a little darker, and this is the stage for that. Now that everything has some sort of a value on it, we can start to compare and contrast those. I'll continue to refine my bolt until I don't see any major differences between it and the original subject. Sometimes on reflective surfaces, their corners catch the light. So I'm going to use my eraser to drag out a few highlights that are strongest. Highlights that up to this point I've left alone because they were details too small to maintain through the development of my drawing.